Good evening to our viewers in Europe, and hello to our viewers here in the United States. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany. And on behalf of the ACG and the French and German Consulates General in New York, it is my honor and my pleasure to welcome you to today's discussion. I'd also like to thank the French-American Foundation, the French-American Chamber of Commerce, and the German-American Chamber of Commerce for supporting this event. I'm joined today by Dr. Regine Grienberger. She is the Cyber Ambassador in the German Federal Foreign Office, and Henri Verdier, the Ambassador for Digital Affairs in the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs, for a discussion about European digital sovereignty in a transatlantic context. Regine Grienberger directs cyber foreign and security policy in the German Foreign Office. She has worked primarily in the fields of EU foreign policy and EU financial and economic policy, and she served as the deputy head of the Minister's Office under the current Foreign Minister, Heiko Maas, and his predecessor, Sigmar Gabriel. Herzlich willkommen.
Thank you, Steve.
And Henri Verdier is responsible for digital affairs for the French Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs. Previously, he served as the Interministerial Director for Digital Information and Communications Systems of France and Director of EDALAB, the French Agency for Public Open Data. In addition to his public service, he is an entrepreneur. Bienvenue. Let me start with an icebreaker question to each of you. What is the role of a cyber ambassador?
Okay, this is not really an icebreaker. This is a chilling question. So my role is to relate the different aspects of cybersecurity, the technical, the political, the societal, the economic, to foreign policy. So I have a lot of coordination to do. This is, I would say, the major part of what I do to compose, let's say, our situation awareness. This is one thing. And then the other one is, if we are aware of threats and insecurities in cyberspace, we of course have to react in an operational way. We do this in the EU context by our cyber diplomacy toolbox. And of course, also in a more general way by setting up norms, cyber norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, but also by applying or developing ways of applying international law to cyberspace. So, in short.
I think that's a great way of summarizing it. Ambassador Verdier, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's quite the same, and we are more and more digital ambassadors in more and more countries. Just not to repeat what Regine said, let's add first, most people don't realize how the digital revolution is now beginning to be geopolitical. It changed the relation between states. You can think about the tech war between China and US. You can think about the rules of war, of the next war. You can think about economic development of emerging countries. So it determines our international relation. And sometimes, and we have to avoid some mistake, states want to determine the future of digital revolution. So here we need diplomacy. And maybe the second point is that to make what we said, Regine and me, you can use the old tools of a basic diplomat to digital issues, but you can also invent digital strategies to promote your ideas. Just one brief example, and maybe we'll speak again concerning the real issue of the tons of terms of services of the tech companies, which are quite the new law, the new common law of the world. We could decide to pass a bill, for example, at the European level to standardize the terms of use. We didn't, but France is proposing a digital common where everyone can contribute to have the common database of every terms of use of every countries in every languages and all the changes, and to give this resource to innovation and to the legal tech and to governments. And so that's something very new for diplomats. And that can be an important part of digital diplomacy.
I think it's fascinating to hear both of you talk a little bit about digital diplomacy in our at the beginning of our conversation today, because it seems to me that as the world gets smaller, in part due to things like the internet, there needs to be a new approach to deal with the new infrastructures as they exist, and also the new challenges.
I don't agree with this vision, which is clearly promoted by big tech companies. We are states with one vehicle I can destroy one data center. With one bill I can change the tax system. So yes, we have to work together and to fix issues and to invent a future on civilization. But this idea that big tech companies are quite new states, I totally disagree with this idea.
Well, and that wasn't what I was implying, or not what I meant to imply, but rather that there is a changing environment, and it makes sense for nation states and capital cities to think about how to deal with that changing environment, and it brings with it a whole new set of challenges. And so it sounds as if each of you has a large portfolio. You're dealing with open arching issues, how to govern cyberspace, how to deal with issues like artificial intelligence or security, which are very new, and for which there's not necessarily a draft in place of how to deal with these issues. But you also have to deal with nation states and different ways that nation states handle some of these issues, not to mention companies and other actors that we will undoubtedly touch upon during the course of our discussion. But because our conversation today is supposed to focus on European digital sovereignty in a transatlantic context, let's start there. This is another topic that has been high on the agenda of the new European Commission under the leadership of President Ursula von der Leyen. Even before she took office, she was talking about finding ways for Europe to have technological sovereignty in some key technological areas. And so let me maybe start by asking each of you to define European digital sovereignty for me, to help me guide our conversation today, but also for our viewers, so that we have a common jumping off point. Ambassador Grienberger, do you want to perhaps go first?
Yeah, thank you. You think you asked an easy question, but you didn't. Of course, defining it depends a little bit of from where you look at it. It's a little bit like this little story with the elephant examined by blind men, and the one who touched the side of the elephant thought it is a wall, and the other one thought it's the tusks of plowshares, and so on. So depending on what you look at, it's difficult to explain. But we had a European Council last October, and they collected some of the elements that belong to European digital sovereignty. It's first of all the ability to define our own rules within the internal market of how we protect our citizens. This is very important. It's the ability to make autonomous technological choices, to have a choice between different vendors, for example, of backbones of the digital infrastructure. Then, of course, also the ability to innovate, the ability to further develop the technologies, so that we are not only users and consumers, but also actors in the field of technological development. And finally, also the ability to shape global rules. This is also very important. And when you look at the different definitions of digital sovereignty that are used in Europe, one thing is also important to consider. We are 27 nation states in the European Union, and the most important element of our definition or of our way of discussing European digital sovereignty is that we develop this European reflex, that we define sovereignty not anymore as national sovereignty, but European sovereignty, and that we find ways to implement this in our national and European policies.
And Ambassador Verdier. Yes, I hope that you will find a question where I will disagree with Regine, because the debate could be boring, but I totally agree. You know, I was thinking, preparing this exchange, internet at the beginning was about freedom. It was about empowering people. It was about sharing knowledge. It was about allowing permissionless innovation. And it did work. And we have to protect the open, free, and decentralized and neutral internet. But those days, we can ask ourselves whether digital technology continue to make us freer. We have issues with surveillance capitalism, with privacy, with monopolistic platforms that can close the innovation stream behind them, with cybercrime, with cyber war, and those are growing threats on our freedom. And as Europeans, we want to be masters of our destinies. That's quite simple. We want to have the choice. We want to be able to decide our future. And for that, we need one very simple concept, which is strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy. We want to have the choice. That's very important to put the emphasis on the fact that strategic autonomy is a non-rival vision of sovereignty. You can be autonomous and we can be autonomous. I can be autonomous on Germany also. And we can share with Africa a vision of a global autonomy. And so that's very important to be clear that we are not speaking about strategic hegemony, that we are not, and maybe we could not, that we are not speaking about isolationism or protectionism. We are speaking about having the choice. And as you know, France will take the presidency of the European Union next year. We will promote with our friends like Germany a complete vision of European digital sovereignty, because as said Regine, the good level is probably Europe. And just to enumerate 4 very important axes, because you know all those conversations are mostly about trade and free trade, and that's not the main issue. So we will explain and we will act as Europeans with the idea that sovereignty, strategic autonomy, starts with security. Of course, if everyone can spy you or destroy your infrastructure, you are not free. So a serious vision of security is very important. With creativity, yes, we want startups, unicorns, researchers, artists, and we need to have more and more. And I don't know if you see this in the US, but the last 15 years were the beginning of something in Europe. We are starting to understand the principles of the digital economy. Yes, we need a coherent and serious normative approach. And here, especially here, a strong conversation across the Atlantic could be very, very useful. And the last thing is that, as you may know, in digital economy, the owner of the resources, the platform, the owner of the data is the boss, in fact. So if you build your services on within the garden of someone else, you are not free. So, of course, that's the game. We will try to promote industrial policies in Europe, of course. But, and here also, we could have a strong alliance. We consider that most states didn't understand how much digital commons can be a part of a sovereignty strategy. If you use Linux, I don't know how you say, OpenStreetMap, Wikipedia, no one can expropriate you. So you are free. And we will try as Europeans to contribute with money, with data, to the field of digital commons.
So let me push you on this just a little bit. This was actually a question that I was thinking about asking later in the conversation, but I think it fits in here now. because of what you started with by saying that the internet has brought freedom. The internet is based on openness. And I think it's fair to say that that has been an asset, but it's also a liability. And so as you look around the world at different value systems, at countries where there are different sets of values and indeed different versions of the internet, how does that play into attempts to achieve global cyber governance?
Should I perhaps start? Yeah?
Sure, sure.
Okay. Well, of course, we have a lot of discussions if the internet can be free and open or free and global at the same time, because we have the systemic rivalry between, let's say, Western liberal notions of how the internet should work and authoritarian notions of how it should work, where the state would like to take control also on every movement of the citizen in the internet. We have this discussion, and what we try to reach is to avoid the fragmentation of the internet that would be necessary to have it free and to have it free but not open. And what we would like to do this by setting up and further developing these global norms that you were mentioning. Global norms on how states should behave in cyberspace, and where let's say the rooms, the spaces for the civil society are also described in a way, let's say, coherent with, for example, the United Nations Charter. And this is something where we would say, okay, this is really a challenge. We have to master this challenge. It is not an easy task, but what we would like to really avoid, is the fragmentation of the internet. Just because of the reasons that Henri already mentioned, this is how the internet started, in a kind of anarchistic way, without states having any say. And now we would like to maintain the benefits of this free internet, the advantages, for example, for economic prosperity, without let's say, restricting the cyberspace to national spaces or hemispheres.
Yes, my view is that, again, you are asking a question that sounds harmless, but that is very complicated. It seems to be your specialty. And the answer depends of the level of the layer you are looking at. For example, we have deep layers like TCP/IP, like basic infrastructures. And here, for example, from my perspective, the open and decentralized architecture is the best architecture. Because it's resilient, and that was the project of the DARPA 50 years ago. So, and for example, China does propose a new TCP/IP in the International Union of Telecommunication, and we have to be careful here. And you can speak about the high layers, like user-generated content, like content policies, etc. So first, to answer, it depends of the layers you are considering. Then maybe just an example. France, with Germany, with a lot of friends, we did launch the Christchurch call against terrorist content and violent extremist content. With New Zealand, after the awful attacks in Christchurch. Here, so the issue is that terrorist content are more and more part of the terrorist action. The terrorist did film himself and did spread the video. And the week after the attack, there were 1 million attempts to republish the video online, just on Facebook, and 400,000 attempts to publish the video on YouTube. So here you have to make something. And you have to make something, and here you can make a lot of mistakes. You can not make enough, and you are giving weapons to the terrorists. You can overreact as states, and you are building an Orwellian world. Or you can give the power, the legitimacy, the sovereignty to the companies. And you can ask to Mr. Zuckerberg to fix the problem without any counterpower, without any negotiation, without any transparency. And what did we do? We tried to build a new complete rules of law organization with civil society, companies, states, with clear responsibilities and duties and prerogatives for everyone. So as governments, we have the duty to make good laws, to make the same law for everyone, violent extremists from extreme right or jihad, the same laws. Companies have a duty to take over the content, but to make it in a transparent matter and to allow people to contest a decision. And civil society has a duty to watch each of us and to be sure that fundamental freedoms are not threats. And the answer was an open society vision, but with a complex organization. And that's just one example about just one issue, which is terrorist content. We could have the same reflection about every issue in internet governance. But clearly, I believe that democracy is the strongest system, and that liberal, open societies are the best path. But we have to work hard to make it happen.
Ambassador Grienberger, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or because I think I saw you nod your head as...
Yeah, I'm nodding. No, I think Henri has explained it well. This is okay. This is our view. Yeah.
Okay. You know, one issue, and Henri Verdier, you said I ask simple questions that end up being more complicated once one digs into them. I'm afraid I have another topic that we've sort of skirted around so far in our conversation, and that is or concerns data. Henri Verdier said that the owner of resources is the boss, and when it comes to cyberspace, a lot of that is data. And I was happy that he was also talking about DARPA in 50 years ago, because I'd like to go back in time a little bit. In 2000, the US Department of Commerce and the European Union agreed to a safe harbor in an effort to regulate the way in which US companies can export and handle the personal data of European citizens. And the goal of that was to try to create a single set of data protection requirements for transferring data across borders of countries that joined that safe harbor collective. For our viewers, that's something that the European Court of Justice ruled against. And so the question that I have is, how can one achieve a better flow of data between the US and Europe? And how does that play into European discussions about sovereignty?
I think that Regine is better than me on this issue, so I will say two brief things. And you have the time to prepare yourself, Regine.
Okay.
The best way is quite easy. You pass a bill which is a mimic of the GDPR, and we observe the complete adequation between the two systems, like we did with Japan. And we have the main market is a market protecting privacy. So this is the most simple approach from our view. I'm half joking, of course. Just to mention two very important ideas. This issue of data is very complex because here we cross a lot of different issues. The GDPR was about protecting the privacy of European citizens. It's not a tool for economic policies. But also, we need also to think about economic policies. And of course, we know that a huge amount of data is a necessity to develop an AI industry for research. And we do promote open data also. But so it's, again, very complicated because we mix a lot of issues. And that's very important. You said that the GDPR forbid to export data. That's not the case. The GDPR promotes a very important principle. You can use personal data with the consent of the citizen. the decision was that the European Court of Justice decided that we don't have enough protection with American companies to have an automatic permission to export the data. So we need engagement from the company because the global law system don't allow an automatic decision. But the GDPR don't forbid at all to export data. We need to be sure that the consent will be respected. That's the only issue here. Regina, do you agree with this?
I agree with it. And of course, we have also to make a differentiation between personal data, which is the GDPR about, and other data. So what is important to understand is that the GDPR is the manifestation of European values of privacy and personal data protection. And this is, of course, this has to do something, for example, in our German case, with our history, that we are not completely comfortable with the idea that anybody else has a stock of our data. And this is something we would like to control. We would like to control what other people know about our personal data, and we would also like to have the right to be forgotten in the end. So this is what the GDPR is about. And of course, there is let's say, an external effect to it. And therefore, we have already the second loop now. We have a second ruling by the European Court of Justice. Again, Privacy Shield, the successor of Safe Harbor, was also said to be unapt to reach the target of protecting personal data. So again, the case is open, and we really have to find a solution now. And by the way, of course, people have to give their consent to what their personal data are used. But Max Schrems, the guy who is responsible for these two European Court Justice rulings, he sent out reminders now to, I think, 500 big tech companies that their cookie banners are also not in line with the data protection laws, because most people are not able to follow this, this maze of I agree with this and I don't agree with that, and just simply click and continue to use the I don't know, the web page or whatever. So we have also to make sure that the law is followed not only by the letter, but also by the sense of it.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that all makes sense. And I mean, both of you are following this even more closely than I am, but it seems that with a new administration in Washington, there is a renewed interest in Europe, but also in the US, to try to come up with a new agreement regarding transatlantic data transfer. I don't know what that would look like, and I don't know how likely it is that the suggestion of Ambassador Verdier would be followed, that the US would just adopt GDPR. I know it was meant half in jest, but I guess the question that I have is where is there common ground between Europe and the US? And perhaps another way to phrase that is a question that was posed by one of our viewers, who writes, restoring the EU-US alliance and digital relationship must rest on finding a durable solution to the question mark over EU-US data flows. This must be the prerequisite to any other initiative. What does success look like in the short term? And what's the long-term goal for the EU when it comes to global data flows?
Well, where to start? First of all, I think that also in the US, there is a growing awareness of the need to protect personal data and also of the value of personal data. Because there is this saying, if you don't pay for it, you are the product. So this is something that also citizens in the US become increasingly aware of. And it's just the same feeling that Europeans have perhaps for with another background, but with the same, let's say, with the same effect, that we want more control over our data. I would promote a holistic view, not only focusing on data, but bringing together all these issues: security, business, the data issue, the innovation issue, because this is not solvable in one, let's say, on one thread or in one silo alone. We have to review the whole set of transatlantic relations regarding these digital technologies, because so many areas of our cooperation are affected by these technologies.
Can I push you on that before Ambassador Verdier weighs in? Because it seems like there's a situation where US European data flows are stuck, right? They're in limbo almost. And it's very hard for businesses to respond, for companies to react to this. And so the question I would have for you is how does one help the private sector? How does one help that digital economy function when there's this hiccup with the data flows, while Washington and Brussels and other member states in the European Union try to figure out the structure and framework?
Well, I mean, also, Henri mentioned it already, but in the short term, there is, I think, no other possibility than respecting the EU directives when when entering the European market. I mean, this is this cannot be helped. We cannot, and it is perhaps also worth it, because of course, the European market is a big market and a lot of consumers. So perhaps this is what makes it also, let's say, advantages for US companies, also the big corporates.
Thank you. Henri Verdier, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, very briefly. First, I think that, you know, as a tech entrepreneur, I was in the Valley every year for the last 20 years. I feel, maybe I'm wrong, but that I have a knowledge of this ecosystem. And to be frank, first, I think that there is a progressive convergence of the two countries. So the main people, le grand public, we say in French, think that we are very similar, and because they look your movies, and in fact we are not. We have serious, real cultural differences, of course. But some Americans think that France is a Cuba without the sun. Some French think that in the valley, everyone is a fanatic of Ayn Rand, libertarian, and in fact, it's not true. In the valley, people understand that we need rules of law. There is a real concern about the decision after January 6th. The valley asks itself if really 5 people can decide to ban a head of state in charge from the nets. And in France, we understand that we need more permissionless innovation and more creativity. So there is a convergence. There are also a lot of issues where we are very, very close, about cybersecurity, about the protection of the open and free internet, about so here we have to, about this data issue, to reduce the distance progressively, but it's not impossible. It's absolutely not impossible. Just mention that probably in these issues, on both parts of the Atlantic, we need to give more place to the techie guys. For example, I'm very comfortable with quite every publication of the Berkman Center of Harvard. And I'm not very comfortable with every proposition from the French government, because a lot of them don't understand how internet works. So, but when I'm speaking about tech guys, of course, I'm not speaking about the public relation from the big tech companies who are financing the electoral campaigns. I'm speaking about real tech guys, Mozilla Foundation, Center for Human Technology, and maybe that could be also a path to open the conversation with the tech ecosystem of both rivage of Atlantic.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes a lot of sense. One of our viewers wrote in as we were having this exchange that there are, or that he believes that there are severe implications for trade moving forward as well if we don't get to the bottom of this and really develop some structure for data flows, and that's something that might lead to even more disruption as we come out of the pandemic, where supply chains have been disrupted as well. What are your thoughts on the implication for trade of where we are with data flows at the moment?
Well, I would say I can't deny it. It will have implications for trade. At the moment, we can only work with these standard contract clauses, and this is not compatible enough. So we have work to do. We have to do it. We have to find a solution for that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's slow, but we make progress. For example, 2 years ago, during the Japanese presidency of the G7, for the first time, France agreed to speak about free flow of data with trust, because it was the Japanese proposition. And we said, yes, we can define the trust. So trust needs privacy, respect, of course. And here, because you are speaking about trade, personally, my main concern about trade is not about privacy. It's about re-enclosure. My issue is if we open all the data and just few companies can use this and can re-enclose the data because they have a monopoly on some computational capacities or monopoly of some algorithm or things like this. In fact, we don't organize a flow of data. We organize new monopolies. So from my perspective, we have to fix the monopoly issue. And here, all the concept of open data, open government, digital commons, contributive commons are very important.
Thank you. I'd like to fold in a couple of viewer questions that relate to digital sovereignty. One viewer writes, to make the vision of European digital sovereignty a reality, do we need a European digital agency that can regulate and finance the digital public goods? Do either of you have any thoughts on a European agency to manage that?
What do you call digital public goods?
That's yes. I guess you should be the ones to sort of define that better than I.
No, so it's not a secret. Yes, we are considering so far to take our responsibilities and to work closer to the digital commons ecosystem. But you said regulate. Mm-hmm. No, the definition of a digital common is that the governance is made by the people who do contribute. So we won't try to invent a governance for the digital commons. We want to contribute, maybe with data, maybe with money, maybe with work. We want to learn to use those resources, but we won't try to tell to Mozilla or Linux or Wikipedia what they have to do. And here, it's a lesson of modesty for government. We didn't invent this. It works very well without us. We can work with them, but we didn't organize this. That's okay. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Regine Grienberger, do you have anything to add to that?
I was also stumbling over this use of regulation in this context. And this is just a remark. other ministries are much into lawmaking. We as diplomats, we are not, this is not our main activity. So what we are doing is kind of organizing the exchange between different opinions, and this is exactly what we need when we're discussing digital commons. So this is not about lawmaking.
So maybe as a follow-up to look more at the work that traditional diplomats do, is it fair to say that the EU's push for digital sovereignty is an effort for Europe to buffer itself from both the US but also China at the same time? Is it a reaction?
I would say it's certainly the case that European citizens expect from the European Union as, you know, the integrated governance structure in the, let's say, in European minds, to make sure that we as Europeans can live our European way of life also in the future. And there are certain threats, and of course, authoritarian tech is a big threat. And we had a very intense discussion, for example, on how to set up the 5G networks in Germany. But many Europeans are also not really comfortable with the idea that they sell themselves completely to big tech companies. So the European Union as policy-making institution has to make sure that these expectations of citizens are met. It's kind of a reaction, if you want, but it's more than that.
Your question is funny for me. In France, we have a long tradition of non-aligned allies. And sometimes United States don't understand our position, and sometimes you do. It depends. So your question is a bit a trap, because yes, I feel that we don't want to be held hostage to a technological war, for example. But of course, we know perfectly well who our allies are, and we know perfectly well with whom we share values. So it's not an equidistant position, but it's a non-aligned alliance.
Well, but as a follow-up to that, let's maybe widen the aperture a little bit. Before you got on the call, Henri Verdier, Regine Grienberger and I were talking a little bit about the United Nations very briefly. And I guess the question that I have for each of you is that if the United States and Europe are unable to reach an agreement on some of these critical issues, like data, how can we build those meaningful alliances? How can we find common ground when it comes to international standards, whether it's through organizations such as the ISO or the ITU, in order to develop policy and to set standards? And I guess the question I would have there is whether multilateral organizations can play a role in setting those standards, especially when it comes to data protection.
Maybe we could speak also about tax issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, tax issues play into that as well, of course.
You know, first, it's also a complex question, and to be frank, so far today we don't know. We have a lot of hope and expectation with the new administration, and we are just starting to exchange. We can recognize that on a lot of issues we are very close now. But again, cybersecurity, terrorist content. Yes, those two issues, for example, we are very, very close. The promotion of multilateral, multi-stakeholder internet governance within the United Nations. And now we have the two complex issues, who are taxation system and data exchange. Probably it's more complicated because quite every big tech companies are American. So when we exchange with the American administration, we exchange with a like-minded administration, but that's is a temptation to protect its companies, of course. So here it's not we are not symmetrical, but we can deal with this, I feel.
I think there's no reason to assume that we will not find consensus. We have solved so many questions in the past, and I think we will be able to do this, And of course, it is complex and it will take a while, so a little bit of patience is also needed. We are, as Henri said, following with interest how the new administration acts and reacts, and this is kind of a learning exercise also for us all, I think.
I agree with you. I guess the question that I have there is how much time do we have? We're all also observing a more and more active role by China in setting some of the technical standards. And obviously in China, there's very little in terms of barriers between state and industry cooperation, which makes it difficult for a free market economy like Germany or France or the United States to compete. And so, you know, the window is closing in terms of how much time we have. And I feel like that might be a little bit of a luxury sometimes. I was actually moderating a discussion earlier today with someone from a Washington, D.C. think tank who argued that if we can't get technology right in the transatlantic context, we won't get anything right, and that it's getting harder and harder to find bridges between Europe and the United States. And she pointed to the fact that there aren't as many European leaders when it comes to technology companies. And how can one try to create more tech companies that can assume leadership roles in Europe?
Well, the European model of digital sovereignty is one element is autonomy, Henri explained this, but the other one is openness. So we do not intend to duplicate everything and have a European Silicon Valley or a European Amazon or something like that. We have our own digital ecosystem. It produces, it does perhaps not produce the big gatekeepers in the digital market, but there are other services and products that are very well delivered also by the European ecosystem. And for the rest, we rely on an open internet and open markets and open access also to the products of other countries and regions. So these two elements are decisive. One is autonomy, but the other one is also openness. It's not about protectionism and it's not about isolation, what we are talking about.
But as one of our viewers pointed out in the Q&A, it's also about innovation and how one can try to create more of an environment for innovation.
Yeah, we are good in Europe. We are good at the, let's say, the basic academic research. So this is, let's say, something we are good at. What we are not so good at is the spin-off into, let's say, practical use of what we found, of what researchers found. So yeah, but there is a lot of understanding of the problems now, and I'm quite confident that with, for example, with the money that will be available for research and innovation activities during the next, we call it a multi-annual financial framework. It's kind of a 7 years budgetary period for the European money. During this next 7 years, that we will see some developments there, as we did in the past.
Just one idea. I basically, hélas, I agree with your analysis, but don't forget something, because that's also important. Because here there is also a kind of optical illusion. The Silicon Valley did invent the consumer internet business, and they have quite a monopoly about consumer internet and consumer internet, except maybe that China will launch some companies with a protectionist strategy for a market of 1 billion people. it's completely different. Consumer internet is just a market of advertising, in fact. And in fact, advertising is just 1% of the world GDP for 1 century. It didn't change. We'll have to face a lot of other challenges. Healthcare, smart cities, connected health, transportation. We will digitalize everything. And here in Europe, because we have industry, because we have cities, because we have all the academic researches Regine did mention, we play a role, in fact. For France, for example, Legrand is an impressive company about domotique, I don't know how you say, smart homes. So don't make the confusion between the consumer internet business from the Silicon Valley with the attention economy and advertising money and all the digital revolution. And probably if we speak just about advertising and consumer internet, we have this great balance, disbalance. But if we have a wider vision of digital revolution, we have things to share.
So one of our viewers has chimed in both in the chat and in the Q&A to bring to our attention that there's a think tank that's been established to focus on the data economy. It's a collaborative effort of the European Law Institute in Vienna and the American Law Institute. And this group is working on the principles for data economy and has been working on this since 2019. And he writes that the content of reconciling EU law principles and US law principles is at the core of the work of this organization. Are you both familiar with this organization?
Well, data economy is not my main, the he is a she, Stephen.
Oh, sorry.
Data economy is not my principal responsibility, but of course we rely on these kinds of also civil society engagement in solving the problem at hand.
Okay. No, sorry, I don't know this work, so I would be very happy to receive the 280 pages of of work. I can share with you my email.
Okay.
And
well, so let's maybe switch gears a little bit. I know that security has come up a little bit in our conversation so far, but it's not something that we've really drilled down into, and yet it is an important area of concern, particularly following several cyber attacks that we've seen recently. And obviously we've had more recent cyber attacks, but the SolarWinds attack affected hundreds of American companies, nearly a dozen federal agencies, but also 6 EU institutions. And I think that incident heightened the awareness of the European Union and the United States to work together to develop some common cybersecurity standards. And so, particularly with a view to the upcoming US-EU summit, to what degree do you think that cybersecurity will play a role in discussions? And what's the status of establishing or solidifying the current framework for cybersecurity between Europe and the US? Regine, you're nodding, so let you go first.
I just wanted to start with saying that in cybersecurity, we actually have between Europeans and Americans quite a good cooperation for longer than just January 6th. So this is a field of cooperation where we have quite a lot of continuity. And we are grateful for that, of course. There is a lot of exchange going on between our, of course, intelligence services, but also between our cybersecurity agencies. And in the case of SolarWind, it proved to be very effective because we were quite soon informed, and our cybersecurity agencies could also react to the data breaches that were discovered. So this was really an example of very good cooperation.
Yes, I just want to add, but I can sign Regine's declaration. First, of course, for France and Germany, I feel cybersecurity is also a matter of sovereignty. So we do protect ourselves, and we are not too bad. We participate to attribution or sanction if we have our own evidences, and that's important. But we do exchange a lot, or intelligence services do cooperate a lot. But just to mention two other issues. First, of course, here the NSA is a long forward the rest of the world. They have more money, more knowledge, more computation capabilities. So sometimes they have to, or to give us evidences that we can check, or to wait the time we make our own evidences. So sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable, of course, but doesn't matter. And the second point is that we, European, for example, within the Paris Call, we did promote the idea that international law and security is not enough. We need the private sector to make progress. We need to recognize a responsibility of private sector. You know, I'm a tech guy for 20 years, 25 now. I started my first company in 1995. So that's quite 30 years. I don't understand why we tolerate such a weakness. We would not tolerate this kind of weakness in the energy industry or transportation industry or spatial industry. How can we agree to receive software and 2 months after this apologize because there were a backdoor, so here is a patch? And in respect to the companies, it's not easy, I know this, but we need to engage them in a continuous improvement process. So we did propose this within the Paris Call. We do a great job within the OECD. We try to promote together this idea in the United Nations. The last American administration was a bit reluctant to the idea that maybe there is a responsibility of the companies. Maybe some companies did lobby a bit the administration to avoid this kind of recognition. But in fact, if there are holes everywhere, we won't protect anyone. So we need to be sure that there are no holes.
So one approach, of course, is to deal with the holes, right, and making sure that the holes aren't there. But another is to make sure that any cybersecurity issues are addressed or cyber threats are addressed. And one tool in that is, of course, the use of sanctions. And I know that this is something that the Biden administration has used. It has placed sanctions on Russia following the SolarWinds hack. And it announced that it would be holding joint cyber exercises with several other countries, including France, but also Denmark, the UK, and Estonia, but
Germany.
And Germany. Okay, so I was going to ask about German involvement and each of your countries' sort of response when it comes to the use of sanctions.
First, let's mention that Europe also made sanctions against Russian and Chinese and North Korean. So it took time to have a global diplomatic toolbox to agree about the scale of severity, etc. But now we are ready and we are sanctioning also. That's important because not every American knows this. Second point, your answer was a classical answer. When I said we have to make better protection, a lot of people say, yes, but criminality has to be sanctioned. I agree, but for example, in your real life, the police does protect you, but you close your doors and windows during the night. You don't sleep with doors and windows open. And if everyone did sleep with doors and windows open, the police could not protect everyone. So there is a balance here. And again, I feel that we did agree with too much weakness in the global digital industry. It's not serious, sometimes. And for example, as a former CTO, I know this. Everyone knows that some software are very dangerous because a lot of hackers loves Active Directory, for example. So I'm not accusing Microsoft. I'm accusing just one software from Microsoft. But statistics are clear. So why could not we fix this?
Regine, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really important to understand that cybersecurity cannot be provided by states alone. Industry, business sector, consumers, users of software, civil society, law enforcement, everybody has to contribute to this endeavor to make the cyberspace a secure space. It's not possible to do this, let's say, to give this responsibility only to states and governments, because it doesn't work like this. Like Henri said, everybody has first of all be aware of his or her own cybersecurity measures. If you pin your password to your screen, it's your fault if somebody takes it and invades your directories. It's I mean, it's obvious.
No, and
I may just one very brief thing about, yes, as Regine said, it's not possible to make the security just with governments, and maybe it's not desirable. And last week I had a conversation with the chair of the National Security, the French National Security Agency, because these days in France there is a huge campaign of big companies, not big tech companies, big companies, saying the government has to protect us more. And the general told me, I don't understand. Do they really want the government to enter within their system and to be within their information system, to know everything about them? What's happening? So to protect someone in IT, you have to take the control. You have to have the root password. So do you really want a world where governments say, okay, I come with my protection, open your system, give me the keys, I will protect you? That's maybe not a good balance of power.
Yeah. No, I mean, I see what both of you are saying, and I think that a lot of the responsibility rests with the end user when it comes to protecting their access and protecting their own data. But perhaps there's another...
Just the end user, for example, a small company of Internet of Things, making something, I don't care, whatever you want, and selling something with a default password, which is 0000. It's criminal. It should be forbidden, because every hacker starts by trying this kind of password. And no one will change the password the first day. So it's a threat, a very serious threat. And it's very easy to fix this. So it's not just the end user, it's not just the consumer.
No, but it's also small companies, and I mean, and bigger companies. I mean, I think that that's where it is the user, whether it's the individual or the company. And I think your points are good ones. But there are also other areas where there are cyber threats, and perhaps with a view to the election in Germany later this year and in France next year. One of the concerns that I think some people have is about the safety and validity of the election process. Even with paper ballots, with voter rolls, with tabulation systems, there is the possibility of manipulation. And I guess with a view to the elections in both countries, what kind of monitoring is in place to give voters confidence in the election system in both of your countries? And maybe since the German election is first, I can ask you to go first, Regine, and then Henri.
And actually, we had also an exchange with our American partners on this a few days ago. So this is really also something where we are learning from each other. I see two kinds of threats for the integrity of the elections. The first one is what you mentioned, the physical manipulation of the election outcome. Of course, we vote on paper. So we have no polling machines. So this is something that is quite safe. Of course, the transmission of the results from the polling station to the central unit where everything is counted. This is of course done digitally, so there is a, let's say, this channel has to be protected. The bigger challenge is the disinformation that is going on around the elections, and you've seen this also in the US. We see this in Germany. This is quite a problem, and it's very difficult to counter. We rely not on debunking and counter narratives, but we rely on providing the citizen with good quality information on the issues that he's interested in. For example, pandemic measures, vaccination, and so on. So that there is a possibility for everyone to find the information that he or she needs or looks for in a, let's say, reasonable amount of time, also online, on high quality sources. And we try to do this in order to make sure that the citizen can, at least in the end, take an informed choice. So these are the two threads, and there are two different ways of how to deal with it.
First, I share with Regine a deep repulsion towards voting machines. For years, I consider that the hearth of democracy is that each citizen can verify by himself that the process has not been manipulated. And yes, in France, as in Germany, I can stay in the voting bureau. I can take notes of the results. I can go to the town hall, city hall to say if my bureau was well reported or not, and I can buy the newspaper to see if my city was correctly reported. And even the more stupid French citizen knows that he can contribute to check, and that's a real democratic security. But the temptation of voting machine is growing and growing even in Europe. So we'll see what will happen. And then is a manipulation issue. In France, we have three convictions. First, let's separate the global fake news issues, the global and foreign manipulation. Foreign manipulation is a direct attack to your sovereignty, again. It's a direct attack to the hearth of your democracy, an attempt to change the decision of the sovereign people. So unacceptable. Mm-hmm. Here we can use every kind of retortion if we prove this. So it's different, and it's very important to separate this and the political opposition, stupid people, etc., conspirationists, etc. Concerning this, we try, I can share with you, so it's just prototypes and experimentation. I share with you a link. We try to have the most open source approach possible. So for example, we do develop tools to check if they are bots in promoting a hashtag, and we share these tools with the civil society, with public research, etc. Because that's very important to be sure that democracy itself creates its own antibodies. You cannot afford a government saying, I'm protecting you, I'm erasing fake news. It's very dangerous. So we need everyone to be involved. We need the more possible transparency. If possible, we need to be more systemic and less content-centric. So, and let's try the French definition of foreign interference is something wrong, hostile, foreign, artificial, massive, and hostile. So it doesn't depend on the content, in fact. They can promote real information. If it's foreign, artificial, massive, and hostile, we cannot agree with this. So, and maybe we can have, we do encourage in France behavioral research and less content-centric approaches. And here I can share something. Of course, it's difficult because we have privacy issues and we have intellectual and industrial property issues. But here, the cooperation with the big tech companies is not at the good level. And European governments public research in US and in Europe don't have enough raw data and enough freedom of research. And we need to understand very precisely this phenomenon. We need sociologists and anthropologists and communication sciences and everyone to work on this. And here the cooperation is not so bad, but they don't share freely data and knowledge with public research and governments.
Is that something that you see changing in the short term or not really?
It depends. To be frank, from my perspective, it's how I work. Some questions from governments are good for the business model of the social networks. They do agree they don't want terrorist content or child abuse or hate. So here we cooperate very casually. Some on our vision could become a threat on the business model. Personally, I think that we cannot afford too much personal advertising. And we need to understand how a filter bubble and algorithmic reinforcement does act. And here they fear a bit because so it depends on the topic.
Authentic digital identities, it's also an issue.
Well, and that I think also gets into a topic that we've not really touched on today, namely artificial intelligence. And that's a whole other chapter. We've touched on it very, very briefly on the periphery, but that would be maybe a topic for another day to get into. But as we start to come to a close here, I'd like to pose a question that one of our viewers has written in, which is sort of as you look ahead to the coming weeks and the coming months, and particularly the summit in 2 weeks, but even beyond that, what can Europe and the United States be working on together when it comes to a transatlantic agenda in the area of technology, the digital world, the cyber world? Is there any low-hanging fruit where there can be some easy wins or some early successes that can help chart the course moving forward? Henri, do you want to go first maybe? And then
yes, I did mention some of a very clear and simple cooperation we actually have, like cybersecurity, because we do cooperate a lot, like terrorist content and violent extremism, like the promotion of open and free and secure internet. Maybe we could have a look on the global internet infrastructure. I'm speaking about submarine cables and things like this. Maybe we could agree to help emerging countries to develop themselves with a real internet and not a Huawei or a Facebook internet without any net neutrality. This could be very low-hanging fruit. I also want to mention that we have a lot of hope with the democracy summit that the Biden administration did announce. If it is a summit to improve the democracy in our countries and not just a coalition of democracies against non-democratic countries. We can speak about this also, but we need to be sure that we will fix our own issues in all democracies. If I may, because I tried to answer to a question from Johannes, and I did delete the question and I did not answer. So just the question was, Mozilla as a digital command is very dependent on Google's payments. How can we fix this? And the answer is quite clear. Let's diversify the financement and let's find some people money. Sorry, but we can come back to your question.
No, that's quite all right. That's quite all right. Thank you for folding that in. Regina, any thoughts from you on areas where the US and Europe can be working more closely together than they are right now?
Henri's list is quite comprehensive. I would like to perhaps highlight two issues that are of particular importance for me, for us in the Foreign Office. This is first implementation of norms, of cyber norms. We have quite a good set of 11 voluntary non-binding norms which have to be implemented now. So there is, of course, norms on supply chain security, on protection of critical infrastructure, and so on. And this is a global activity, and we have to align our interpretations of how these norms can be implemented, and also help, like Henri said, and this is the second issue that is important to me, to build the necessary capacity to implement these norms. So cyber capacity building would be another area of cooperation where we could quite quickly reach visible results.
I would like to thank both of you on behalf of the American Council on Germany, but also the French and German Consulates General here in New York, for taking the time to have this wide-ranging conversation. I feel like there are some issues that we were really only skimming on the surface of, and where it would merit continuing the discussion. Obviously, these are topics and issues of great interest and of great importance. But Regine Grienberger and Henri Verdier, I want to thank both of you for taking the time to have this important conversation. And also to our viewers, thank you for all of your questions and your active involvement in the chat and in the Q&A. Hopefully there will be opportunities to convene again in person in the not so distant future, and we will actually be able to hear your voices during the discussion. But thank you very much.
Thank you for having us, Stephen. And thank you to a great audience and very complicated questions.
Yes, thank you again. And that's a proof that this conversation can be substantive, important, and together between this kind of exchange, Europe and US, we can definitely invent something new.
Yes. Well, we should keep the conversation going. I think that that's what this is a sign of.
And we will travel again and we will meet again.
Yes. Well, we look forward to that. Stay healthy until then.